from 2A Patriots here with Paul Junge, 8th District Republican Congressional candidate. Paul, welcome. Thanks for coming to talk to us today.
Good to be here with you.
We've got a lot of questions for you. Our 2A following is certainly sent some questions in to us.
Well, it's an important time in our nation's history, and we can definitely see the challenges to all kinds of our constitutional rights. So absolutely pleased to be here to talk with your audience.
And we're pleased to have you. Thanks for coming today. I'm just going to go right at the gorilla in the room and start with extreme protection orders, aka red flag laws.
Right.
You gave a fairly satisfactory answer to our questionnaire,
right.
But I think everybody also knows there's a video out there in social media that shows you saying that that you would take a look at red flag laws.
Right.
Can you clear up the discrepancy and give us your final position on red flag laws, sort of final answer style?
Yeah, look, I oppose unconstitutional efforts to abridge all of our constitutional rights, including our rights to due process and including our rights in the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. So, I think, look, in a primary, people do their best to kind of advocate or find slight distinctions that I frankly think never really existed. I feel, I'm pleased to be endorsed by the NRA, and I have always thought of myself as a strong believer in our Second Amendment rights. I have always opposed unconstitutional red flag laws. I think what I was trying to address there was that as a legislator, I would look at any piece of legislation. It'll come to my desk, I can look at it and go, oh yeah, this is another one of those efforts to take away guns, to abridge our Second Amendment rights, to violate rights without due process. And as soon as I can determine that, then no, I can't support that at all. I understand in a primary, people try to make slight distinctions. I think that's one that never existed, and I'm absolutely pleased to clarify that I cannot, would not, will never support any red flag laws.
Well, that's great. We're glad to hear it. Also in the answers of your questionnaire answers, you identified Section 922B3A of Title 18 as infringing on the rights of gun owners via prohibiting licensed dealers from doing business across state lines.
Yep.
How do we fix that? Is it a legislative fix? Does it need to be challenged in court?
Well, I mean, if the legislature, if the Congress won't change it, then yes, I think a court challenge would be appropriate. But that's one of the reasons I think we need to make a change in Washington, because with Alyssa Slotkin and Nancy Pelosi, that will never get addressed legislatively. So that would be one of my priorities should I get to Washington, is to say, look, these prohibitions that are stopping licensed, responsible gun dealers from being able to engage in their trade, but then you have to stop when you get to Ohio or Indiana. That just makes no sense. So, I think the preferred route is to change it legislatively. I mean, if the Republicans can hold on to the Senate, if we can take back the House and reelect President Trump, why not fix that law? And then there won't be a need for a court challenge. Because as strongly as President Trump has been able to start to move some of the courts, you can't always be certain about that. And there's obviously cost and expense and time involved if you go the court route. So, hopefully, should I get elected, that would be something that if we can, especially if we can get a majority and take the House back, we could address that legislatively.
Are there other similar laws that you see as infringing on gun owners' rights?
You see what happens when Democrats take control of state legislatures. They took control of Virginia, which I think is a massive motivator for the whole sanctuary county, sanctuary state movement, is you see state legislatures start to say, yeah, we're going to do everything we can to abridge our rights. Or you can look at what just aggressively, consistently happens out in the state of California, where in every way they can find, the courts have told us we can't limit your guns, well, let's limit your ammunition. Or let's limit the capacity of a magazine. In every way they can think of, they try to, be clever and cute to restrict your rights to keep and bear arms. Another reason that it's great to be with you here right now is, should I be elected, I would want to be working with advocacy groups around our Second Amendment rights and talking with them and saying, hey, if we can only get to 2 or 3 or 4 things, what should those 2 or 3 or 4 things be? Maybe we could have a more comprehensive piece of the legislation and not just be limited. But the taking it little bites that typically the Democratic Party wants to do, we need to stop that and to reverse the trend.
So one of the things that gets to me personally when I see it happen is some of the efforts to raise the cost of being a shooter.
Okay.
Because it doesn't hurt the dedicated shooter as a hobbyist because they're going to pay the price necessary. The person that it hurts is perhaps the single mother who just wants to be able to purchase a firearm to defend her home and her family.
Right.
How specifically can we work against all of these out of the blue efforts to raise the cost, tax, regulate, and essentially make it too expensive to be a shooter? How can we address those problems?
Well, I mean, I think, as I was just saying a moment ago, I mean, especially when the Democrats take control of different state legislatures, they don't just try to limit the amount of ammunition or the size of the magazine. They also put taxes on it or just make it so onerous, either for the customers trying to purchase ammunition or a firearm, but for the dealers trying to be engaged in that business, driving up their costs, preventing them from being able to have a shop in various counties. And sometimes you get that just by community type of agitation. So I think some of it is legislative, both at the federal level and at the state level, but it's also just a leadership issue of saying, hey, we need to quit demonizing people who want to lawfully own a firearm to defend themselves. And when we get more education, more advocacy out there, that look, let's not constantly be looking with suspicion and almost just saying, oh, you want a firearm? You must be a criminal, and say, no, wait a minute. That is not just a constitutional right, but it's something that helps guarantee liberty and freedom. We need to leadership that will spread the word that, hey, people who are trained and have a firearm lawfully, they stop crime.
In your answers to our questionnaire, you also identified Operation Chokepoint as the type of discrimination against gun owners that you would fight against. I think that problem has been solved, but I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit, give a little bit of detail about how Operation Chokepoint happened, and also talk about where the next threat, where the next under the radar effort like that's going to come from.
Well, I mean, you get activist type of state attorney generals or the federal government at different times looking for any way they can to try to stop people from being able to exercise their constitutional rights. So, if I'm elected to Congress, I can't obviously stop the Attorney General in the state of New York or the Attorney General out in the state of California, but we can consistently send the message, hopefully, with legislation and just by being vocal and verbal on the issue that we're not going to let state legislatures can't trump the U.S. Constitution. And an activist, whether it's governors or state attorney generals, also can't just use these extra legal means to try to stop people from keeping and bearing arms. So, whatever new clever little way that the gun grabbers, if you will come after people lawfully keeping and bearing arms, we just have to stand up against it. So, the creativity, I guess, if you will, of the other side to always find a new avenue, whether it's through the tax code or through a variety of regulations or whatever it is, we just have to stay vigilant to, through whatever means, whether it's a piece of legislation, whether hopefully getting judges that will stand up to that, being able as private citizens to challenge those types of things, whatever means we can. And, again, should I be elected and get to Congress, it's also important, obviously, that we reelect President Trump, because with a Republican, with President Trump leading the executive branch, that's a way to one, not have the mischief come from the Department of Justice or alcohol, tobacco, and firearms or wherever else it might be, but also to be able to push back against any of the states that might try to engage in that type of activity. So,
rights of gun owners are constantly under attack. They're under attack judicially, legislatively, and via propaganda in the media. Mm-hmm. Which of those battles do you think is the most important, the most critical battle, and how do we engage?
How am I going to rank all of these challenges that are going on? I guess I would say we need to be prepared to either oppose legislation where it's being advanced. Let's say I win election and unfortunately Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats stay in control. It will be to try to block their legislation. Hopefully we would keep the Senate. I think you use whatever tactic you need to address the challenge that's coming at you. If you have the tools and the power to pass legislation, you do that. If you don't have those tools, and so you have to try to stop things through lawsuits and that type of thing, you do that. So, and you know, whether if especially if you don't have the legislature and you're being stymied by the courts, if you are, you always have the ability to try to combat untruths that you see in the media. I mean, it's interesting. I am now a first-time candidate, and we all know, I think, that the media is hostile, not just on our Second Amendment rights, but on so many other issues, that we just don't feel that they close to reasonably and fairly represent what's going on. I mean, you know, you look at what's happening in our cities across the country, and I think if you rely on, you know, CNN and you know, the New York Times, you think it is mostly peaceful protests. They're not telling you that innocent people are being killed, that property is being destroyed, that law enforcement are being assaulted on a regular basis, that a lot of people just have no idea. So to your question about, you know, is it legislature, is it through the courts, it also has to be through getting the word out of what's really happening, including with our Second Amendment right. There is a perception, I think, by a lot of people that guns just go off by themselves, or that you know, an otherwise law-abiding person suddenly becomes a criminal because they're possessing a firearm, and they are not aware that the overwhelming majority of people that own firearms do so lawfully and never commit a crime. And in fact, it is often lawful people having a firearm who stop a crime in progress. It just doesn't get reported on.
And what about the propaganda war? How do we fight that most effectively?
I don't know. I'm open to ideas about that. I mean, you know, look. I mean, you look at. I mean, what does Michael Bloomberg's group, Americans for Gun Safety?
Every town for gun safety.
Every town for gun safety. I mean, what's interesting about that is how many firearm classes does that organization put on? How many? None of that. What that really is all about is how do we try to take guns from law-abiding citizens? I am a former prosecutor. There are plenty of laws about committing a crime with a firearm. And when you watch people, unfortunately, especially on the left, they say they care about gun violence, but then, you know, they don't keep those charges in there, or they release violent felons. I mean, you want to stop violent crime? When someone has been convicted of a violent crime and they have a sentence to serve as a result of that, have them serve that sentence. You know, we now have, you know, these leftist DAs and that just, oh, well, let's release them. Oh, yeah, that's what causes all kinds of problems, including gun violence, is when you have already demonstrated violent criminals and you just say, go back out. You know, I mean, we have laws on the books. People follow, law-abiding citizens follow those laws.
Sure.
The criminals don't. You know, and you know, the statistics bear it out. The overwhelming majority of crimes that are committed with a firearm, the person who got that firearm got it illegally. So it wasn't a failure that we needed another law. We need to enforce the laws we have. And when we have violent criminals, we need to have them serve their sentences and not let them back out to commit more crime.
Let me move to Paul the shooter, Paul the gun owner.
Okay.
When's the last time you made it to the range to do some shooting?
I was down in Jackson County at a range right around the 4th of July. I was shooting a little skeet and also had a pistol in my hand and doing a little bit of shooting with that.
Would you describe yourself as owning a lot of guns, a few guns, no guns, too many to count?
Well, I can't say too many to count. I do own a shotgun, which I like having for principally just for home protection. One thing that has happened in my life is that I have moved from time to time. You know, I served in Washington D.C. and then
Good luck getting a gun there.
That's right. A lifetime member of the NRA. I appreciate firearms using for hunting. I appreciate it for sport. Certainly appreciate it for self-protection.
Do you have a CPL?
I do not.
Do you plan to get one?
You know, I guess when I see what's happening around the country, I probably should.
Yeah. It's hard not to want one right now.
That's right.
You mentioned being at the range in Jackson. Was that a campaign event, just there privately to shoot, or a fundraiser?
It's just down there to shoot.
Okay. You mentioned skeet. You mentioned you like to shoot a pistol. What do you think about AR-15s? Do you think they're a little too much for the average public to have?
No. I mean, I think an AR-15, if I've read recently, is the most commonly owned rifle in the country. So, look, I mean, the notion that the Second Amendment doesn't say, well, you can have, a musket. You can have a weapon that you should expect you'll get outgunned by the bad guys.
Right. What, in general, are your plans to defend and secure our constitutional rights, both the Second Amendment as well as all the other rights that we see in jeopardy right now?
Well, I mean, for better or for worse, I'm an attorney, which means that I think almost everyone who's been to law school took a class in constitutional law. I view the Constitution as, and I think anyone should, as the fundamental law of the land. And I think one thing you need to do, should I get to Washington, is when any piece of legislation you look at, you start with that foundation and say, is this bill consistent with the Constitution? Does the federal government have the power to do the things that this bill purports to do? So one of my approaches would be that anything and everything I look at, make sure it comports with the Constitution. And then, as you say, I mean, look at the challenges that exist. We're here specifically mostly talking about challenges to people's Second Amendment rights, which I fully expect to be on a regular basis vigilant about protecting, not just looking at new threats, but looking, as we've discussed earlier, existing limitations that should be changed so that we get people to be able to much more freely and easily exercise their rights. I don't know, as I came here today, that I had a list on the top of my mind of other constitutional rights that I think are consistently be violated. As I sit here and think about it now, I mean, I can remember when I was in college and people talked about the right to free speech. Then that was a pretty widely accepted view, and it's kind of shocking as I look back in the last 30 or 35 years. I'm a Republican, and it used to be that in popular discourse, the Republicans were thought to kind of want to limit speech, but the speech codes from the left that are attempts to shut people down, to shut them up, really even to prohibit thinking in certain ways. I think that would be a priority that I would have to bring to Congress, to say we can't allow college campuses to try to prohibit speech. We can't allow certain jurisdictions to say that you're not permitted to do that. We have to look at ways that social media gets used to shut people down and to stop the expression of certain points of view. Because, and this is why you need protections, you usually see those efforts to shut down speech and thought really aimed in just one direction.
Sure.
So, that would, I think, beyond just the Second Amendment rights, the attacks that are coming at the right to free speech and free thought and free association. I look, and I might add another one. I just was at church, and we're talking about how so many states are prohibiting gatherings to worship. And, I guess I hope that those are limited to the idea that we're facing a coronavirus, but you worry and wonder, is this a taste that the left
test for
getting?
What's next?
Can we, hey, we got away with it, can we do that now? So I don't like to be that cynical about it, but it's hard not to worry about those kind of things. And so those would be just at least 3 or 4 of the constitutional rights that I would be very much thinking about and saying, we've got to do things to make sure and just as we've been discussing, not necessarily just through legislation, although as a member of Congress, that would absolutely be a priority. But one advantage you have once you become a public figure, an elected figure like that, is that gives you a platform to be talking about that and advocating on those issues. And I would absolutely hope and expect to take advantage of that to speak out for our constitutional rights.
Perception is that you have been less engaged with the 2A movement than some of your primary opponents were. What can you do to convince 2A followers that you're the real deal and that we need to support you?
Well, as I say, I think when a primary campaign goes on, one candidate might grab onto one issue or be at a particular set of meetings. But the idea that I have not been an advocate for constitutional rights and Second Amendment rights, I think, is not a true one. And if this is maybe one stepping stone towards being able to demonstrate that, I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I mean, I am a lifetime member of the NRA. I have spoken at public meetings. There have been rallies around the district. in favor of law enforcement as an example that I have attended. To say it's important that we stand for the people that are protecting our rights and,
Sure.
and our lives and our property. I've attended public meetings, earlier in my life. I can remember meetings I've been to where groups were loudly speaking out against police, as one specific example. And I was like one of the few citizens that had showed up to say, hey, no, the people of this area want police. So, and as I said, as a former prosecutor, one thing I definitely know is true, to maybe just change the question just a touch here. When you hear advocacy from the other side about defunding the police, that is just insane.
I always hear that, and I think they should be more highly funded, and that the profession should be elevated to be more like a doctor or a lawyer in terms of society's, the way society views it.
That's well said, and what I often think about that is I don't know what elite, out of touch people it is that would advocate that, because in any time I've talked with communities where they're threatened by crime, they don't want less police, they want more police. And so, to your question about, how could a 2A audience that maybe thought Paul wasn't as active on some of these issues, I've been active on not just Second Amendment rights issues, I think, but other rights in hostile territories. I mean, I think we were talking about my biography maybe before we came on camera. I was born in Michigan, lived here a good part of my childhood. But I did attend college at the University of California, Berkeley, which is not always thought of as a welcoming place for conservatives. And I was regularly on campus advocating, and sometimes, being threatened verbally, people trying to. So I've been standing up and making that fight, even in hostile territory, basically my entire adult life. And I hope I will be able to continue to demonstrate both through the rest of this campaign and should I be successful in the halls of Congress that I will be a fighter for the Second Amendment, for all of our constitutional rights.
Realizing it's not really your wheelhouse as a federal candidate, but what do you think of the state level county 2A sanctuary movements that we see going on?
I was incredibly sympathetic in the state of Virginia when you saw those threats that those county sheriffs and those county governments that said, hey, wait a minute, hey, state legislature, you don't have the constitutional authority to do some of the things you're doing. We will be a sanctuary against that. Here in the state of Michigan, I didn't see as much of an urgency about that because we, at least now, and we still do, we have a state Senate and a state House that are controlled by Republicans. But I get it as a let's set up that protection now before it becomes threatened, and so I understand that, and I think it's perfectly understandable, reasonable, and appropriate for citizens to go to their local elected officials and say, hey, we'd like you to pass this and make it clear, because we were talking earlier about the value of kind of sending a message, of being able to kind of educate, and when local leaders see that level of interest from citizens and it gets reported more broadly through the media, I think there becomes a greater awareness of the importance of respecting Second Amendment rights and what those rights mean. It's not just some vague, isn't that something that was written on a 230-year-old document or something, as you sometimes hear people say, but why it matters.
So what's your take on our governor and AG signing on to the letter asking for tighter gun control? I think it was signed by 11 or 12 different states, and including signed by Whitmer and Nessel.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, I know.
I'm shocked. No, I mean, yes, as we were discussing earlier, when the Democrats get control, they come for our guns. When Democrats get control, they look in every way they can to continue to seize power and control. I mean, that's part of what's just shocking, just to take a brief aside from your question. The governor, every 28 days, renewing her emergency order so that she and she alone can decide all these different issues. So it doesn't surprise me at all that our Attorney General here in the state of Michigan, our governor here in the state of Michigan, they think they're fairly safe. They're probably banking on the idea, oh, sure, we'll win re-election. So we'll just go, with a full bore, violating your rights, taking your guns. No, I'm not surprised.
Okay. That's all I have in the way of questions for you. Do you have any questions about the 2A movement?
I hope this conversation that we're having right now isn't just a kind of a one-off type of opportunity. I fully expect, should I be successful, that we'll be continuing to have conversations, not just with you, not just something that's recorded, but with your members on a regular basis, especially when there is important legislation come up, or especially when we see threats, not just to our Second Amendment rights, because I know many of the members of the 2A movement are passionate about more than just the Second Amendment. We've been talking about that. So I would look for ongoing opportunities to be discussing what those threats are, how we might best address them. So as I said, I don't know that I have a particular question right now, but just I want to offer an assurance that from my side, at least, I want to have a continuing engagement so that we protect these rights and these freedoms that are so important to us.
Do you want to make a closing statement?
My name is Paul Young. I am now the nominee here in the 8th Congressional District, and I think it's got to be abundantly clear that our current representative, Alyssa Slotkin, her rights are in peril while she is our representative.
Sure.
And just to be really narrow, the NRA, having just recently endorsed me, also made clear that she gets an F. So it's an important race. I mean, I'm a first-time politician. This is the first time I've run for office, and I'm familiar with people talking about the idea that this is the most important election ever. You hear that many cycles, and I've got to say, in 2016, I think it probably was, up until then, the most important, and so thankful that President Trump defeated Hillary Clinton. I think it's even more important now. We must re-elect President Trump, and we see the mischief that a Democratic House of Representatives can engage in. Would there have ever been an impeachment without a Democratic Congress? The answer, of course, is no. That was a silly little exercise. So if we can replace Alyssa Slotkin, that alone doesn't put the House back in Republican hands, but we're not going to get Republican majority without winning this seat back. So,
sure.
So please, you and everyone watching, we're working hard every day to make sure that happens, and because we just can't trust Alyssa Slotkin with our constitutional rights.